I remember, I really believe it was my first trip, but it could have been my second trip to Poland, to Auschwitz-Birkenau. And in that trip, um, something happened. Um, we had gone to the children's barracks to do an overnight. A lot of the young people who were there kind of got excited, and after we finished a very long day on the tracks, they wanted to do bearing witness at night, all night long in the children's barracks. As I remember correctly, the actual camp, which is now a museum, closes, and at that point it was closed. So we had to go through a hole in the wall, through a hole in the fence. And I thought that was itself ironic, that here's a place where people were trying to get out at some point, and we were going through the hole going in. But that's another story. And it was very powerful, and there were stones that I kind of put in my pocket that I collected from the children's barracks, and there were a couple of splinters from the tracks, because the tracks are obviously very old, and I put those in my pocket, and those are going to be mementos for me to take home. When I got home, or even before I got home, I began to get these dreams, which were almost like nightmares, in which sequentially I would see all the faces that I had reviewed at the Krakow Holocaust Museum. There's a museum with lots and lots of pictures and lots of faces, sort of almost like passport size faces. And so when I finished that retreat, for some reason those faces began to pop up in my head. So I got into New York at home, and every night those faces would pop up. They were not threatening, but they certainly created a tremendous amount of discomfort and concern for me about what was it that was happening to me. And I went to a woman who is now a Roshi Eve Marco, who I believe at that point was not married to Bernie Glassman, but is now Roshi, Bernie Glassman's wife and student, but she was a student of Bernie's. And I asked her, and she said, well, you know, feed them. In Buddhism, we have something called feed the hungry spirits. And the hungry spirits are these spirits that we all have, that have desires, that have wants, that have attachments, and usually they're depicted as these creatures with very thin throats and very large stomachs. And she said, it might be hungry spirits. And I told her this story about how they were appearing. And I began to do that. In my altar, I began to feed them and literally put piece of banana or bread and meditate on it. And I also told her later on that I had taken pieces from the Holocaust site, and she said, you got to take them back at some point. And it hit me that growing up, my grandmother's thing with me was this thing about not taking what doesn't belong to you. And I think I've told this story in some other place, but I'll tell that story at some other point, which is basically, she would say, you know, you steal a penny, you steal $1 million, and I would argue with her that that was not so. Her point being that it was the concept of taking which doesn't belong to you. I think that played in my mind in some ways, if one wants to be rational about this. But truth be told, I fed them, and they still kept coming back in many, many ways, less and less and less. And it wasn't until I went back in the next year and I took the splinter of tracks and whatever other things I had taken from that site, that the first night that I went back to Auschwitz and I took them back, all the figures disappear and they never came back. And that was a very, very profound experience for me, and one that I keep thinking about, because I don't know the answers about all of what happened, but it certainly was one that had an impact on me. And that's a story.